Now that we have everything set up, we're going to go ahead and start working on a little validation framework to make sure we're able to validate the inputs correctly. The first thing I'm going to do is create a new file, and I'm just going to call this validations, and it's going to go inside of source. And we're going to save a little bit of time and just run our tests in watch mode, so that's going to give us a nice quick feedback loop. So I'm just going to open another terminal and run yarn test unit with the watch flag. The next thing I'm going to do is head into my file and open up my validations, and we're going to use the test for this as well. So I'm going to head into my example spec here, and I'm just going to delete this one because we don't need this anymore. Let's go ahead and start on our required validation. So we're going to go ahead and think a little bit about our interface first and how we'd like to define validations. And I see two use cases. One is going to be when the input is valid, and that's just going to have a status of true or a valid status of true. And the other case is when the input is invalid. So we're going to have a Boolean flag as well as a message saying why it's not working. So if we were using TypeScript, we could go ahead and define something like this. We might call our interface status. We're going to have a Boolean here called valid, and that's always going to be present, true or false. And we're also going to have a message, and this is going to be an optional one. And what this is going to be is the error message. For example, if the input is required or if it's outside the bounds. Maybe in the case of the weight, it's going to be too high or too low. So we should inform the user what is wrong with the input. I'm not going to be using TypeScript here. I'm just going to use regular JavaScript because I think it's a better way to demonstrate, but this is how you could define an interface if you were using TypeScript. So let's go ahead and let's go ahead and start with our test. What we're going to do, we're going to use proper test-driven development here. So I'm going to describe my required validator in here, and we're going to have two cases for now, the true and the false case. So let's go ahead and test those as well. So the first one's going to be it is valid, and that's just going to go and return that interface we discussed. So I'm going to first create a new variable called actual, and I'm going to validate something using required and pass in my valid value, which is going to be, let's say, my name. That's going to be valid because it is required and it's going to return true. I'm now going to write my assertion, so I'm going to expect the actual value here, and that's going to be equal to that interface we discussed earlier. So it's going to have a valid status of true, and because it is true, there's no error message, so I'm going to leave that one blank. Let's go ahead and save this, and of course this is going to fail because required doesn't even exist. Let's go ahead and import that firstly, and then we're going to define it. So I'm going to go ahead and import that from source/validations.js, and we're going to have to define that one as well before we can actually get this to pass. So let's go ahead and do that one too. I'm going to just export a function up here called required, and let's just return nothing for now just to see if this is going to compile. And with a bit of luck, this is now going to compile correctly. There we go. So let's go ahead and get this one passing. All we need to do for the minimum pass here is to return true. So I'm just going to jump up here and do that now. Of course, this is not going to work for the other use case, but this is a good place to start. And I'm just going to put my value in here as well as the first argument. This actually should be valid in here, not return, and valid true should get our test passing. Let's go ahead in the next lecture and move on to the next case, which is when the input is not valid.